Eli Tanner, a retired Army sergeant, thought the Arizona desert would finally give him peace. But when a mining explosion buried him alive beneath the dunes, the silence became his grave. Miles from help, the only sound was the hiss of shifting sand, until a bark cut through the storm. It was Shadow, his K-9 partner lost 3 years ago in Iraq, clawing through the desert to reach him. But when Shadow unearthed Eli, he uncovered more than a man. He exposed a secret buried by the military itself, one meant to stay hidden forever. Because in Red Mesa, nothing dies quietly, and sometimes God sends back the loyal to dig up the truth the world tried to bury. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments and let us know how far this story of faith and loyalty travels. The desert around Red Mesa stretched endless beneath a pale morning sun, its silence broken only by the hiss of wind brushing over rock and bone. Heat shimmered above the horizon, and the air itself felt brittle, like it might crack if touched. The excavation site lay in a narrow canyon bordered by cliffs that glowed rust-red, ancient and watchful. This was where the earth whispered of things better left buried. Eli Tanner, 52, stood near the rim of the pit with his hands in his jacket pockets, squinting against the glare. He had the kind of face that told stories without speaking, creased with lines carved by wind, regret, and time. His dark gray hair was cropped short, his beard trimmed close to a square jaw that had once belonged to a soldier. A faint limp in his left leg betrayed an old wound, though he never spoke of it. Once, Eli had served 2 tours in Iraq with the U.S. Army's K-9 division. Once, he had believed in duty, command, and redemption. Now he was a security guard for Red Mesa operations, watching over a site that promised discovery and paid just enough to dull his conscience. But this morning, even the desert felt uneasy. The sky had that strange, washed-out look before a sandstorm, and the wind carried the scent of iron and static. Eli's boots crunched across loose gravel as he made his rounds, nodding toward the 2 engineers setting up equipment by the dig trench. Luis Ortega, 28, wiry and restless, had olive skin, black hair slicked back, and the kind of grin that made people trust him too fast. He wore his shirt sleeves rolled up, a silver chain glinting at his throat. His father had been a miner, his mother a teacher. He'd grown up in dust and ambition. Luis liked to say he chased buried things because he was born in the dirt. His partner, Hannah Cole, 32, was his opposite in every way, calm, deliberate, and fiercely private. She was tall and slender, with copper-blonde hair pulled into a low braid, freckles scattered across sunburned cheeks, and a gaze that could cut through noise. She spoke with the clipped precision of an engineer, but carried herself with the quiet grief of someone who'd once lost too much. A small silver locket hung at her neck, worn smooth from being touched too often. No one knew who it belonged to. Eli didn't ask. "Morning, old man," Luis called over the wind, waving a tablet. "Ground radar's lighting up again. Something big under Section B." "Probably another damn pocket of air," Eli muttered, stepping closer. "Or a snake pit. Both'll kill you if you dig wrong." Hannah frowned at her monitor. "This isn't air. The density's wrong. There's a hollow space about 30 feet down, maybe metal reinforcement, like a structure." Eli's brow tightened. "What kind of structure?" "One that shouldn't be here," she said. The wind kicked up, scattering dust across their faces. For a second, the sun dimmed behind a veil of sand. Eli felt a prickle run down his spine, the same warning sense he used to get before mortars fell. He scanned the ridge. No movement, just rocks and silence. Then a low vibration shuddered beneath their boots. Hannah froze. "You feel that?" Luis's head snapped up, Seismic shift? Not here, Eli said quietly. Ground's too dry. Another tremor rolled through, stronger this time. Bolts rattled on the scaffold, and a distant rumble built like thunder under their feet. "Everyone out of the pit!" Hannah shouted, voice slicing through the rising wind. But she was too late. The world exploded upward in a roar of fire and dust. The ground split open as if the canyon itself exhaled. Eli was thrown backward, his body colliding with rock. The air punched from his lungs. His ears rang. Sand became smoke. Sky became chaos. The sound of collapsing metal filled his head, a sound he'd prayed never to hear again. Then, darkness. When Eli awoke, everything was red. Dust hung thick as fog, and the air tasted like iron. His head throbbed, his legs screamed. Somewhere close, someone was coughing. "Eli, can you hear me?" It was Luis, his voice cracking through the dark. "Hannah's trapped. I can't move the beam." Eli pushed himself up, his body heavy and unsteady. The tunnel lights were dead. The only illumination, a weak orange glow from fires smoldering above the rubble. He crawled forward until his hand found Luis's shoulder. "I'm here," he rasped. "Hold still." Luis's face was streaked with dirt and blood, his helmet cracked. He pointed toward a collapsed wall of sand and steel, where Hannah lay half buried, her arm pinned under a support beam. She was conscious but pale, her lips trembling as she fought to breathe. Eli gritted his teeth and shoved at the beam. It didn't budge. "Leverage," he said. Luis grabbed a bent pipe. Together they wedged it under the beam and lifted. The metal groaned, then shifted just enough for Hannah to pull free. She gasped in pain, clutching her wrist. Eli's pulse hammered. The entrance was gone, buried under tons of sand. "Radio," he said. Luis shook his head. "Dead. Everything's dead." "Then we dig." They dug with hands blistered and lungs burning, but the sand only shifted inward. Every handful collapsed another. The heat rose, the air thinning fast. Luis began to panic, his breaths short and sharp. "We're not getting out. We're done, Eli." Eli grabbed his collar, forcing him to look at him. "Not today, you hear me? You keep breathing." He had said those same words once to another man, another time, beneath a different sky, and that man had not lived. He wouldn't let that happen again. He pressed his ear to the wall. Somewhere beyond the rubble, faintly, he thought he heard a sound. Scratch. Pause. Scratch again. He frowned. "You hear that?" Luis froze. There it was again. Faint, steady, deliberate. "What is it?" "Something... digging!" The sand above them shifted. Then a thin stream of light pierced through. A shape moved in the glow, four-legged, powerful, coated in dust and ash. Eli's heart stuttered. The creature clawed at the opening, widening it until the hole yawned wider. A muzzle appeared first, black and tan, streaked with gray. Then the head, the shoulders. The German shepherd barked once, hoarse and broken, before lunging toward Eli, tail low but wagging. "Shadow," Eli whispered, disbelief stealing his breath. The dog pressed its head into his chest, whining softly. Eli ran a trembling hand through the coarse fur. "It can't be you." But it was. Shadow had vanished 3 years ago in Mosul when their convoy was ambushed and the building collapsed. Eli had dug for hours until command pulled him out, leaving the dog beneath the rubble. He'd mourned him like a brother. And now, here, in this desert thousands of miles away, Shadow stood, alive, scarred, older. A long-healed gash marked his flank, his left ear folded slightly from an old wound. But his eyes, amber, unwavering, were the same eyes that had once pulled Eli from the edge of despair. Shadow barked again, then turned toward a section of the wall, sniffing rapidly before digging with renewed fury. Air rushed through the small cracks. Eli felt the cool wind kiss his face. "He's found a way out," he said, voice breaking. They dug alongside him, Luis coughing, Hannah holding the flash. The desert had turned from fire to fury. The sandstorm rolled across Red Mesa like a living wall, swallowing sky and earth alike. The air burned with static, the sun vanished behind bronze dust, and the wind screamed so loud it felt alive. Eli Tanner pulled his jacket collar high, squinting through the haze, his eyes watering as grit stung his skin. "Move," he shouted over the roar. "Find cover." Luis Ortega stumbled beside him, coughing hard, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. The younger man's face was smeared with dust and panic, the cut on his cheek still bleeding. "There!" yelled Hannah Cole, her copper-blonde hair whipping violently in the wind. She pointed toward the north ridge where a squat structure half buried in dunes jutted out, a small stone shack, forgotten by time. They ran, heads down, fighting the wind that clawed at them like talons. Shadow led the way, his muscular body low to the ground, tail stiff, paws kicking up bursts of red dust. The German shepherd moved with purpose, his black and tan coat coated in grit, his amber eyes glinting through the storm. He looked like a ghost returned from the dead, forged for moments like this. When they reached the shack, the door was warped metal, eaten by rust, but Eli still had soldier's strength. He slammed his shoulder into it twice until it gave way with a shriek. The three stumbled inside as the storm howled behind them. Eli shoved the door shut and leaned against it, chest heaving, while Luis collapsed to the floor, gasping. "We made it," Luis rasped. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with dust, oil, and the faint tang of rusted metal. Hannah lifted her flashlight, its weak beam slicing through darkness. The room was small, barely more than a single chamber, built of stone and reinforced concrete. Wires dangled from the ceiling like vines, and a long-dead telegraph machine sat crooked against one wall. "This must have been a communications outpost," she said, brushing the dust from an old plate on the wall. "Army Signal Corps, Red Mesa Station, 1950s, maybe older." "Older," Eli said. "Cold War era. Back when the government built bunkers for secrets, not people." He limped to a corner and sank down, unwrapping the bloody bandage around his leg. The gash was deep but clean. He poured a splash of water from his canteen, wincing as it bit the wound. Hannah knelt beside him, silent, and tore a strip from her sleeve to help rebind it. The gesture was wordless but kind. Luis was pacing near the door, jittery. "Storm's bad. No signal, no radio, no food. You think rescue's coming?" Eli looked up at him. "Not tonight." The wind outside roared louder, shaking the old structure. A fine mist of sand slipped through the cracks, settling on their faces like ash. "We'll wait it out," Eli said. Shadow whined softly, pacing the room, sniffing every corner. His movements were deliberate, cautious, like he was remembering something. Eli watched him, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Still got the nose," he murmured. The dog stopped near the back wall and began pawing at the floor, claws scraping stone. Luis frowned. "What's he found?" They brushed away the layer of sand and debris to reveal a metal hatch, its edges rusted and half-sealed. Stamped across it were faded letters, "Property of U.S. Army Signal Corps." Hannah ran her fingers over the lettering. "This place is older than any of us thought." "Everything out here's older than it should be," Eli said, jamming a wrench under the latch. It took both him and Luis to force it open, the hinges groaning until the seal broke. A gust of stale air wafted up, dry, cold, and metallic. Shadow descended first without hesitation. Eli followed, flashlight between his teeth. The beam revealed a small underground chamber lined with wooden crates and rusted shelves. The dust was thick, the air still. He brushed a hand across a label. Ammunition Cal 30, 1985. Hannah climbed down next, eyes wide. 85? That's decades after this place should have closed. Maybe someone reopened it, Eli said quietly. His flashlight caught a framed photograph hanging crooked on the wall. He stepped closer. The image showed a dozen soldiers standing proudly before a bunker labeled Project Red Mesa, 1985. Across the bottom, someone had scrawled in black ink, "Keep buried." He turned the photo over. On the back, in faded pen, were coordinates and a single name, Captain A. Mercer. The name stirred something deep in Eli's memory. He'd heard it once during his service. A scientist rumored to have led a classified weapons test in the Southwest before it vanished from record. Rumors said the test went wrong, leaving the ground poisoned. The government erased the site. Now he held proof it existed. Luis picked up a dented ammo box, prying it open. Inside were dog tags, a corroded lighter engraved Mercer, and a sealed plastic pouch containing a reel of magnetic tape marked Test Log 17, Red Mesa Experimental Site. "This isn't archaeology," Luis muttered. "This is military." "Worse," Eli said. "It's history that wasn't supposed to be remembered." The ground trembled suddenly, a low rumble from above as dust rained down. "We should go," Hannah said. They climbed back up, sealing the hatch behind them. The temperature had dropped. Each breath came out as a puff of fog. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Outside, the storm howled like an animal circling its prey. Luis rubbed his arms. "It's freezing. How does it get this cold after heat like that?" "Desert doesn't owe us logic," Eli muttered. He leaned against the wall, exhaustion creeping into his bones. Shadow curled up beside him, head resting on Eli's lap, his breathing steady, his fur warm against the veteran's scarred hand. For a while, silence filled the room, except for the wind. Hannah sat with her back to the wall, studying the photograph in her lap. "Keep buried," she read softly. "What did they mean?" Eli looked at her, his eyes heavy. "Maybe exactly that." He closed his eyes, listening to the faint whistle of the storm. Memories of Iraq flickered, the smell of gunpowder, the cries of men, the silence after, and always the same dog by his side, waiting. Shadow shifted, ears twitching. Then, in a heartbeat, he was alert, head up, eyes sharp, muscles tensed. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Eli sat upright instantly. "What is it?" he whispered. The dog's gaze fixed on the door. Through the gap in the metal frame, a flicker of movement passed. Tall, human, then gone. Footsteps, faint and deliberate, crunched just beyond the wall, swallowed by the storm. Eli raised a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The footsteps stopped. The wind howled again. The storm passed by midnight, but its voice lingered, a hollow moan that rolled through the canyons like a wounded animal. The world outside the old stone shelter was still trembling, reshaped by wind and time. The moon hung low and sickly behind a veil of drifting dust. Inside, the air was colder, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Eli Tanner sat near the doorway, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the faint crack that leaked ghostly light. Shadow was beside him, muscles tense, ears pricked. The German shepherd's fur bristled as he growled deep in his throat, not at the wind, but at something beyond it. Luis Ortega stirred from his half-sleep, rubbing his face. "He's been doing that for an hour," he muttered. "Maybe he hears the wind." "That's not the wind," Eli said quietly. His voice was steady, calm in a way that came from too many nights just like this one. in deserts far away, where silence killed faster than bullets. Shadow doesn't growl unless he means it. Hannah Cole sat cross-legged near the lantern, the dim light catching the dust on her freckled skin. Her copper hair was tangled, her face pale from exhaustion, but her mind still working. What could he be sensing? The storm wrecked half the valley. It's not like anyone could be out there. Eli didn't answer. He reached for the binoculars hanging on his pack and wiped the lenses clean. When he peered through the narrow slit in the door, something blinked in the distance. A small green light pulsing rhythmically, hovering low above the dunes. Not someone, he said under his breath. Something. Luis moved closer. What do you mean, something? Eli adjusted the focus. The light shifted, darted sideways, then up again, quick and deliberate. He exhaled sharply. Drone. The word hung in the air like a curse. The three exchanged glances, disbelief mixing with fear. Military? Hannah whispered. Maybe, Eli said. But if it was military, we'd already have visitors. He watched the drone's faint glow move in slow arcs, scanning the ridgeline before fading into the haze. They're looking for something. Or someone. Luis cursed softly, pacing. You think it's connected to the explosion? Everything is connected to that explosion, Eli said flatly. He pulled on his gloves and pushed open the door just enough for the cold air to slip in. Stay inside. Outside, the desert was a graveyard. The sand glowed silver under the fractured moonlight, and the wind carried whispers through the canyons. Eli crouched low, shadow moving at his side, silent as breath. The old soldier's instincts guided him more than sight. He reached the edge of the dune, where a thin trail of disturbed sand snaked toward the pit where the site had once been. Something metallic caught the moonlight half buried in the drift. He brushed the sand away. It was a shard of aluminum, no bigger than his palm, torn and scorched. The surface bore the etched letters BD Logistics. His jaw clenched. He knew that name. Once, back in the service, his unit had intercepted a shipment of illegal munitions marked under the same company, a company supposedly shut down years ago after being exposed for arms trafficking. Eli turned the piece over, fingers tracing the logo. It wasn't a coincidence. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. Behind him, Shadow's ears twitched. The dog let out a low warning bark, eyes fixed on the darkness to their left. Eli turned quickly, scanning the horizon. No movement, only the endless ripple of dunes. But he knew better than to doubt that feeling crawling down his spine. He slipped the shard into his pocket and made his way back. Inside the shelter, Luis and Hannah were huddled near the lantern, whispering. When Eli entered, the air shifted. He dropped the shard onto the table between them. You recognize that? He asked. Hannah leaned forward, frowning. Looks like part of a drone housing. Read the engraving. Luis squinted, then froze. BD Logistics, he said slowly. That can't be right. That company's been gone for 12 years, Eli finished. Yeah, I know. They supplied weapons to black market buyers, paramilitaries, even rogue contractors overseas, officially dissolved after a Senate hearing. Unofficially? Looks like they found new clothes. Hannah's face drained of color. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the shard. Eli, she said carefully, there's something I didn't tell you. The company funding this dig, the one I was hired under, it's called Blue Dune Holdings. She hesitated, guilt flashing in her eyes. The contracts, the equipment, even our satellite uplinks. They all use the initials BD. I thought it was coincidence. Luis swore under his breath. You're telling me the company paying our checks is the same one that blew up half the desert? I didn't know, Hannah's voice cracked. They said it was a renewable energy project, mapping underground water tables. I believed them. Eli stared at her for a long moment. The soldier in him wanted to snap, to accuse. But the man who'd seen too many good people caught in bad lies stayed silent. He finally spoke, voice low and steady. This wasn't a research dig. It was a recovery mission, and we weren't the ones doing the finding. They were. He looked at the shard again, the dull metal reflecting the lantern glow. Whatever was buried here, someone wanted it hidden for 40 years. Now they're back for it. Luis sank into a corner, rubbing his temples. So we're stuck in the middle of a cover-up. Great! Hannah sat with her back straight, her expression hardening. If we get out of this alive, we need to expose them. Eli gave a dry laugh. First, we survive the night. The wind outside picked up again, carrying faint static, like distant voices carried, through a broken radio. Shadow stood suddenly, barking once toward the door, his hackles raised. Eli grabbed his flashlight and motioned to Hannah to dim the lantern. The room fell into shadows. Through the narrow slit, he caught a glint of movement, a faint blue laser sweeping the sand outside. The drone was back, closer this time, scanning the shelter's outline. Its hum was soft but distinct. Eli's pulse quickened. They're checking for heat signatures, he whispered. Power it all down. Hannah extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. Only the pale light from the drone's beam moved across the walls, then drifted away. After what felt like an eternity, the noise faded. Eli exhaled. They don't know we're here. Not yet. He leaned back, mind racing. BD Logistics, he repeated quietly. They're not just digging for relics. They're digging for control. Hannah looked at him, her voice trembling. Control of what? Eli's eyes found shadows, steady and silent. Of whatever Red Mesa tried to keep buried. Outside, the wind howled again. Only this time, beneath it, something else moved, whispering through the dust like words too old to be human. The morning came with a thin red light that bled over the dunes like a fresh wound. The storm had passed, but its silence was worse than its noise. Eli Tanner crouched by the cracked window of the old shelter, his weathered face streaked with sand and fatigue. Shadow, his 7-year-old German shepherd, stood beside him, ears erect, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the far ridge. The dog's fur shimmered bronze under the sun, dust clinging to every movement like old scars come alive. Eli lifted the binoculars and cursed softly. They're here, he said. Luis Ortega, nervous and pale from sleeplessness, stumbled closer. Rescue? He asked hopefully, though the answer was already written in Eli's eyes. Hannah Cole straightened from the corner, her copper hair tied messily back, freckles hidden under a film of desert grit. Her voice was steady but dry. Rescue teams don't move in formation. Eli handed her the binoculars, his jaw tight. Through the glass, she saw 6 armed men advancing in tactical gear, their boots leaving sharp lines in the sand. They're sweeping the valley, she whispered. Eli slung his rifle and winced at the sting in his bandaged shoulder. Then we don't stay to meet them. We head north through the old canyon route, the one the medics used during the war. If we keep to the shadows, we've got a chance. Luis frowned. That trail's a maze. Eli gave a humorless smile. Better a maze than a grave. He signaled Shadow, who barked once, then darted through the rear exit where the rocks split into a narrow ravine. They moved fast, wind pushing against them, the sun already a white spear overhead. Behind them came the faint metallic rhythm of weapons and boots. The air thickened with heat. Keep your heads down, Eli muttered, leading them into the canyon's throat where the sandstone walls closed in so tight they could touch both sides. The ground sloped downward, the path twisting like a serpent through layers of red stone. Hannah stayed close to Eli, her breaths shallow. "You've been here before," she said. "Long time ago," Eli answered, "back when the map still had this place on it." His voice held the weight of memory, years of service, orders followed, and secrets buried in sand. Shadow guided them confidently, nose low, tail stiff, stopping at every fork to test the air. Luis kept glancing back, his voice trembling. "They're going to find us." "Not if we let them chase the wrong ghosts," Eli said. They had just reached a fork when the sound of engines cut through the canyon, ATVs grinding against rock, drawing closer. Shadow barked, the sound crisp and measured. Eli's eyes narrowed. "Do it again, boy." The dog barked twice more, sharp bursts that bounced against the canyon walls and multiplied, echoing back from every direction. Within seconds, it sounded like a dozen voices scattered across the ravine. Shouts echoed above, confused, distant. The pursuers had taken the bait. Hannah blinked, astonished. "He's making them think we're everywhere." Eli allowed a faint grin. "He learned that trick back in Fallujah." They moved again, faster this time. The canyon narrowed until they were forced to move in single file, hands scraping stone. The temperature dropped sharply. Even the air tasted metallic. They emerged into a wider basin lined with cliffs, sunlight cutting through the dust like blades. Luis pointed upward. "Look!" Figures moved along the rim. The men were flanking them from above. A single shot cracked the air. The bullet tore through Eli's shoulder, spinning him backward into the rock. He bit back a groan as blood seeped through the fabric. "Eli!" Hannah dropped beside him, pressing her hand to the wound. "You've been hit." "I've been worse," he muttered through clenched teeth. Before she could reply, Shadow lunged forward with a snarl, charging up the slope toward the shooter. The gunman, a tall, broad-shouldered man with cropped dark hair and a scar slicing across his cheek, barely had time to aim before 100 pounds of fury collided with him. His name tag read, B. Harker, and his eyes were the cold gray of a man who'd seen too many wars and learned to enjoy them. Shadow bit down hard on his arm, dragging him to the ground. Harker roared, smashing an elbow into the dog's ribs, but Shadow held fast. Eli, pale from blood loss, steadied his pistol with his good arm and fired once. The shot hit Harker's shoulder, sending him sprawling. Shadow released him and bounded back to Eli's side, muzzle streaked with blood, tail low but proud. Hannah tore a strip from her sleeve to reinforce the bandage. Luis stood frozen, staring at Harker as he writhed against the rocks. "He's alive." "Not for long if his friends catch up," Eli said. He pushed himself upright, wincing. "Move!" They pressed onward through the basin, crossing what had once been a dry riverbed. The wind shifted, carrying voices, orders barked, engines revving. Eli knew they were running out of time. "There's an old med station at the canyon's throat," he said between breaths. "If it's still standing, we can regroup there." The path narrowed again, twisting between boulders that shimmered like rusted metal. The sun beat down, merciless and white. Shadow trotted ahead, occasionally glancing back as if counting them. The dog's stamina was uncanny, his purpose absolute. Behind them, the shouts grew distant but not gone. Luis stumbled, nearly falling, and Eli grabbed his arm. "Keep your head. Fear's louder than gunfire." They reached a steep incline where the canyon turned sharply. Eli paused, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved except heat waves. He dared a look back. The ridge they'd crossed was empty. Harker's body was gone. "He's not finished," Eli muttered. Hannah caught his tone. Then we don't stop until we find that station. They climbed the last stretch as the day began to fade, shadows crawling across the rock. When they reached the top, the canyon yawned ahead like an open throat, the passage narrowing into darkness. Eli touched Shadow's head. You lead, I follow. The dog barked once, a deep, resolute sound that echoed through the stone halls. They stepped into the canyon's throat, swallowed by Shadow, while behind them the desert hunters closed in. For now they were ghosts in the dust, but ghosts that still breathed. The climb to Heaven Ridge felt endless. The sun hung low but fierce, its light cutting through the canyon haze like molten steel. Eli Tanner's breath came ragged, the wound in his shoulder burning with each movement. Sweat traced through the dust on his face, turning him into a ghost carved from red stone and grit. Shadow padded beside him, tongue lolling, coat glinting gold under the harsh light. The dog's paws bled faintly from the rocky ascent, yet he pressed on with the steady, unflinching rhythm of a soldier. Behind them, Hannah Cole's face was pale beneath the sunburn, her copper hair plastered against her forehead, freckles hidden under streaks of dirt. She carried the last of their supplies strapped across her shoulder and moved with quiet determination, despite the tremor in her hands. Luis Ortega followed last, breathing hard, his shirt torn, his dark eyes darting toward every sound. Are you sure the tower still exists? He asked, half in desperation. It existed when I was stationed here, Eli said. That's enough. His voice was hoarse, edged with the weight of memory. The trail wound sharply upward through slabs of crumbling rock. In the distance, the summit gleamed faintly, what was left of the old military radio tower, now little more than a black silhouette against the blazing sky. It had once been part of the desert's communication grid, a link between Red Mesa and distant command posts. Abandoned decades ago, it was rumored to still hum faintly at night, whispering across frequencies no one listened to anymore. As they climbed, the wind picked up, whistling through the jagged cliffs like a chorus of unseen ghosts. Shadow stopped once, ears twitching, growling low before continuing. The smell of ozone clung faintly to the air, something electrical, old, and wrong. When they reached the ridge, the tower rose before them like a skeleton against the sky. Its frame was rusted, wires dangling like veins, the antenna bent sideways by years of storms. The control shack at its base was half buried in sand. Eli forced the door open, dust spilling out in a choking cloud. Inside, the room was small, filled with broken monitors and coiled cables. A cracked window let in a shaft of sunlight that illuminated the fading military insignia on the far wall. United States, Signal Corps. Post 07. Looks like we're home, Eli muttered. He examined the old radio, brushing away a thick layer of sand. The dials were corroded, the battery pack swollen and split. Power's dead. We'll have to improvise. Hannah kneeled beside him, inspecting the shattered wiring. If we can find a reflective surface, we could signal manually. Use the light. Luis pointed at a shattered mirror on the floor. That enough? It'll do, Eli said. He picked up a fragment, cracked but polished enough to catch the sun. Outside, the world was silent again. He climbed the tower's lower rung, steadying himself despite his injured arm, and positioned the mirror toward the horizon. We'll use SOS pattern, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He glanced at Shadow, who was watching him closely, tail still. You remember, don't you? The dog tilted his head, eyes sharp. Eli gave a faint smile. 3 barks, pause, 3 barks again. It was an old trick from their service days, a coded call they'd practiced endlessly in the field. Now, buddy, let's make them hear us. Shadow raised his head and barked. 3 quick bursts, then 3 long howls that rolled down the ridge, then 3 more sharp and clear. The sound echoed across the desert, mingling with the flashes of sunlight reflected from the mirror. Hannah shielded her eyes, scanning the horizon. "You think anyone's listening?" "They'll see it," Eli said. "The patrol routes still run west of here. If the sun hits just right—" He stopped. The radio crackled. Static filled the room, followed by a broken voice. "Copy. This is Montana Air Patrol. Repeat. We see your flash. Hold position." Luis's jaw dropped. "They heard us!" Hannah's face lit with disbelief. "We did it." Eli didn't smile, though relief flickered briefly in his eyes. "Shadow, keep the signal steady." The dog barked again, same pattern, his voice steady as the rhythm of a drum. The mirror's flashes danced across the sky like liquid fire. The static grew stronger. Approaching, hold, visual confirmation. But then, something cut through the air. A faint hiss, a mechanical whine, and then the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. The bullet tore through the shack's window, splintering glass and sending sand into the air. "Down!" Eli roared. He tackled Hannah to the floor as a second shot hit the tower frame with a sharp metallic ring. Shadow barked furiously, circling the doorway, tail stiff, teeth bared. Luis dove behind an overturned table, eyes wide with terror. "They found us! How the hell—" "They followed the signal," Eli said, grimacing. "Damn it, I should have known." Another bullet hit the wall, showering them with dust. Eli crawled to the corner, grabbing the cracked mirror. "We can't stop signaling," Hannah said desperately. "They're coming for us." "And so is the patrol," Eli replied. "We just need to hold them off until the sky answers." He nodded to Shadow. "Stay low, boy." The dog pressed against the floor, growling deep and low. Eli peeked out the window. Down the ridge, 3 figures were advancing in tactical gear, dark silhouettes moving fast and low, rifles glinting under the sunlight. One of them, Eli recognized instantly. B. Harker. His arm was bandaged, but his movements were still sharp and confident. He was alive and angry. "3 of them," Eli said. "We can hold this." Hannah picked up a rusted flare gun from the floor, its barrel bent but usable. Luis trembled, his voice breaking. "We can't win this." "We don't have to," Eli said quietly. The world above Heaven Ridge was burning gold when the final reckoning began. The helicopter's rotors cut through the desert silence, whipping sand into spirals. But even its roar couldn't drown out the sound of gunfire. Eli Tanner pressed his back to the crumbling shack wall, the taste of blood and grit thick in his mouth. His side burned where the bullet had grazed him, but his grip on the rifle stayed firm. Shadow crouched beside him, hackles raised, teeth bared, his chest heaving with a soldier's fury. The enemy was closing in, 3 figures fanning out through the haze. At their center walked Mason Drake. Time had carved deep lines into his face. The once proud commander now looked carved from stone and regret. His beard was shot through with gray, his tan skin weathered from too many deserts and too few morals. A jagged scar traced from his temple to his jaw, earned years ago during a mission gone wrong. The same mission that had nearly taken Eli's life. His calm, almost casual stride said everything. This was a man who had traded conscience for command. Eli froze for half a heartbeat, disbelief flickering through him. "Mason?" The name slipped out like a memory. Drake smirked, lowering his weapon just enough to show recognition. "You always had good aim, Tanner. Still breathing, I see." "You led that convoy in Fallujah," Eli said hoarsely. "You told us Red Mesa was decommissioned." "And you believed me," Drake said with a faint laugh. "You always did have faith in the wrong things." Hannah crouched inside the shack, eyes wide, whispering, "Who is he?" "My old CO," Eli muttered, keeping his rifle trained. "Before he sold his soul." Mason stepped closer, his black combat vest coated with dust, the insignia of BD Logistics stitched faintly over the heart. "Drop the weapon, Eli. You've done enough damage already." "Damage?" Eli barked, the word tasting bitter. "You're the one covering up a graveyard. Red Mesa wasn't a research site, it was a test range. You used our unit as guinea pigs." Drake's expression hardened, the mask slipping just enough to reveal guilt beneath the arrogance. "It was classified," he said flatly. "We were told it was a chemical dispersal trial. We didn't know the compound was unstable." Eli's voice rose, hoarse but steady. "You knew enough to evacuate your officers and leave the rest of us to die." The wind howled through the wreckage, carrying a faint metallic groan from the tower above. Luis peeked through a hole in the wall, whispering, "They're circling. 2 more on the ridge." Drake lifted his sidearm, motioning to his men. "You can't stop this, Tanner. The files from Red Mesa stay buried. This place stays forgotten." "You taught me to save people," Eli said quietly, stepping out into the open. His boots sank into the shifting sand. "Now you're trying to bury them." Drake's eyes flickered with something. Shame, or maybe exhaustion. "You think anyone cares about the truth anymore? You think the brass will reopen this case? There's no redemption in classified history." "Maybe not," Eli said, raising his rifle. "But God still cares." For a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Then gunfire split the silence. Bullets tore through the air, hitting rock, sand, and flesh. Shadow charged first, lunging toward the nearest soldier, knocking him down with a snarl. The man's helmet flew off, revealing a young face, barely 20, terror flashing in his eyes before Shadow pinned him, barking furiously. Drake fired, the shot grazing Eli's arm. Eli ducked behind the broken antenna base and returned fire. His bullet struck Drake's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The commander dropped his pistol, falling to one knee, blood soaking through his uniform. The other mercenaries hesitated as the helicopter's shadow loomed larger overhead, its searchlight cutting through the dust. Hannah ran from the shack, clutching the flare gun, firing once into the sky. A red plume burst, painting the air like a cry for salvation. "Rescue inbound!" she shouted. Luis grabbed the radio, shouting coordinates into the static. "They're coming! Hold on!" Eli limped forward, keeping Drake in his sights. Shadow stood beside him, panting, blood staining his fur but his eyes burning bright. Drake looked up, face pale but defiant. "You don't understand," he rasped. "That compound, it's still here. You can't let them dig it up." "Then you should have told the truth before you started killing for it," Eli said. Drake laughed weakly, shaking his head. "You think the world cares about ghosts? You think your God does?" Eli's expression softened, but his grip didn't waver. "Maybe not the world, but he does." The helicopter descended, rotor wash blasting waves of sand around them. Through the blinding haze, a figure leaned from the open hatch, a woman in a bright orange rescue vest, shouting orders into a mic. Her name was Captain Sarah Lorne, tall and lean, with dark hair tied in a severe braid. Her face was sunburned and sharp, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Put down your weapons! Hands visible!" she yelled. Her crew descended on ropes, weapons drawn, securing the wounded mercenaries. Hannah and Luis stumbled toward the rescuers, shielding their faces from the flying sand. Eli stood unmoving, the rifle still leveled at Drake. "It's over," Sarah called. But Drake reached for his belt, his hand gripping a detonator. "If it's buried," he rasped, "then it stays buried." "No!" Eli fired once. The bullet hit Drake square in the chest, sending him sprawling backward into the sand. The detonator fell from his grasp, clattering harmlessly beside him. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind and the chopper's fading hum. Then Eli dropped to one knee, chest heaving. Shadow, pressing close against him. The dog's body trembled from exhaustion, but he leaned his head against Eli's leg, as if to remind him they were still alive. The rescue team moved quickly, securing the site and lifting the wounded aboard. Hannah helped Eli up, her eyes wet. "You saved us," she said softly. He looked toward the ridge where the sun was breaking through the dust, turning the sky into a river of gold. "No," he said quietly. He did. He glanced down at Shadow, whose tail thumped weakly against the ground. Above them, Captain Lorne's voice crackled over the radio, confirming, "All survivors accounted for. Red Mesa secured." And for the first time since the desert burned, Eli Tanner allowed himself to breathe. The wind over Helena Valley carried the smell of rain and redemption. Weeks had passed since the battle at Heaven Ridge, but the desert still haunted Eli Tanner's dreams. He stood before the courthouse steps in full dress uniform, his posture straight, but his eyes shadowed with fatigue. His salt and pepper beard had been trimmed, yet the lines around his eyes told a story that medals never could. Shadow sat beside him, a sturdy German shepherd with fur brushed clean, but still marked by scars that no brush could hide. His amber eyes followed every movement, calm and loyal, as if he understood the ceremony was for them both. Across the steps, a crowd had gathered, reporters, townspeople, and a few officers from Helena PD. The American flag fluttered above them, snapping in the breeze. Captain Sarah Lorne stood at the podium, her uniform crisp, her expression both proud and solemn. The sunlight caught the faint scar along her chin, the only imperfection on an otherwise composed face. "Today," she began, her voice strong over the hum of the wind, "we honor two who refused to let truth stay buried. Sergeant Eli Tanner and K-9 Unit Shadow, men of courage, of conviction, and of faith." The crowd applauded, soft at first, then rising in waves. Eli shifted awkwardly, his injured side still sore beneath the fabric, but he managed a small nod of gratitude. Hannah Cole stood near the front, her copper hair glinting in the sunlight, now washed clean of sand. She wore a simple beige coat, her face pale but glowing with quiet relief. Luis Ortega stood beside her, a bandage still visible on his arm. He caught Eli's eye and gave a small salute, a gesture of respect from a man who had once doubted everything. When the applause faded, Sarah turned toward Eli. "Sergeant, on behalf of the Montana Search and Rescue Division and the United States Department of Defense, it is my honor to present this commendation for bravery under fire and steadfast service to the truth." She handed him a folded certificate, the seal gleaming gold. Beneath it lay a smaller black box. Inside, a bronze medal shaped like a star, simple, unadorned, but heavy with meaning. Eli looked at it for a long moment, then closed the box gently. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet, but carried through the courtyard. "But I wasn't alone." Sarah's eyes softened. "I know." She nodded toward Shadow, who lifted his head proudly as a young officer approached, holding a leather collar polished to a shine. On the brass tag, freshly engraved, were the words, "Still here, Shadow K-9 retired." The crowd murmured in admiration. A boy near the front, maybe 10 years old, whispered, "He's a hero dog, Mom." His mother nodded, eyes glistening. Eli took the collar reverently and knelt beside Shadow. "You earned this, partner," he said, fastening it gently around the dog's neck. The shepherd wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate, then pressed his head against Eli's hand. Cameras flashed, catching the moment. The soldier and his dog united in silence, framed by the flag and the sky. When it was Eli's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, the wind tugging at his uniform. For a moment he said nothing, just gazed out across the crowd and the distant mountains glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. "A few weeks ago," he began, his voice steady but roughened by memory, "I thought Red Mesa was going to be the place I died. Instead, it became the place I learned why I was still alive." He paused, letting the words settle. "We live in a world that likes to bury things, mistakes, guilt, the truth itself. But sometimes God sends a reminder that the past can't be buried forever." His gaze drifted down to Shadow. "He didn't send angels with wings to save us out there. He sent something better, a loyal heart to remind us that mercy still walks the earth." The courtyard fell utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Eli exhaled slowly. "I don't know why some of us make it home and others don't. But I do know this. Faith is what brings light back to the buried places. Truth doesn't die, and neither does loyalty. We're still here for a reason." He stepped back, lowering his eyes as the crowd erupted in applause. Hannah clapped through tears. Luis wiped his face with his sleeve, pretending it was the wind. Captain Lorne gave a faint nod of approval, her lips curving into a rare smile. The ceremony ended as the sun began to sink behind the courthouse dome. The light turned golden, spilling across the marble steps like a blessing. Eli knelt once more beside Shadow, who was staring toward the horizon. "You ready for some peace, boy?" The dog blinked, tail wagging lightly. "Yeah," Eli murmured. "Me too." As they turned to leave, the wind rose again, carrying fine grains of dust through the air. They shimmered in the dying sunlight, swirling like prayers rising from the desert. Somewhere far beyond the valley, the ghosts of Red Mesa finally rested, and the sound of a single bark echoed faintly across the wind. Steady, defiant, alive. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive on beams of light or with angelic choirs. Sometimes, they walk beside us on 4 legs, covered in dust, carrying the kind of faith that never needs words. Shadow wasn't sent to change the world. He was sent to remind a broken soldier, and all of us, that God's grace often hides in the simplest forms of love and loyalty. When Eli said God doesn't send angels with wings, he sends the loyal to remind us that the past cannot be buried. He wasn't only speaking about the battlefield. He was speaking about life itself, about the quiet wars we all fight every day. Loneliness, regret, fear, or loss. Every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every small choice to do what's right even when no one sees it. That's a miracle. It's the light breaking through the dust. God doesn't always lift the weight off our shoulders. Sometimes he sends a companion, human or animal, to help us carry it. That's his way of saying, you are not forgotten. You are still here. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it, because someone out there might need to be reminded that miracles still walk this earth. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to join a community that believes in faith, redemption, and the quiet power of love. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal heart that stands